The Earth is the cradle of humanity. But you cannot live forever in a cradle. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky.
Ren, I called you for a reason. Look. Look. Over there is the star Epsilon Tucanae, and there's the star 61 Cygni, and further, Albareo. 3 stars in total. There's life there, and there. I know it, Ren. I've seen it. Thought pulses there. Our brothers in intelligence live there. But they are incredibly far away. Ren, I know you work with space at the Academy, right?
Yes, space as a function of time.
Let's combine our efforts, Ren. I want to compress time. And then we'll be able to see the living and speak with the living. You're a theorist, Ren. Tell me, is it possible?
Мне кажется.
I feel like I'm close to a solution, but my conclusions need verification, and verification requires an experiment.
I'm glad you understand me. We are but grains of sand in this boundless space. But today, right now, we are challenging it.
It seems that now is the time for the events described in this novel. With the contours of the creative society now defined, it becomes clear that teleportation is a necessary attribute of a first-level civilization as a fuel-free generator, a health capsule, and a replicator. But it is the technology of teleportation that makes it possible to realize the function of united humanity in its entirety. This function is the settlement of our civilization across the galaxy and then throughout the universe. Nowadays, many people die from diseases, epidemics, wars, and disasters, while others just die of old age. Despite this, the population of our planet is rapidly increasing. What will happen in the conditions of the creative society when human life becomes the main value, when absolutely everyone will be healthy, wars and crime will disappear, natural disasters will cease, and on top of that, the life expectancy of everyone will be increased up to 1500 years. In such circumstances, the issue of the settlement of humanity in the galaxy will become more relevant than ever before. But how? Currently, we are separated from the nearest stars by unimaginable distances. Not to mention the nearest galaxies to us. Indeed, if a spaceship travels at a speed close to the speed of light, which is 300,000 kilometers per second, it will take, and now pay attention, 2 million years to reach the nearest galaxy to us, the Andromeda Nebula. 2 million years. Imagine the vastness of this time span compared to the lifespan of a modern human, and this is just the nearest galaxy to us, not to mention the rest of the cosmos. However, there is one but. It is well known that visitors from distant space have visited us and continue to do so. A vast number of artifacts, evidence of paleocontact, as well as modern data, which we will discuss further, leave no room for doubt. Therefore, the solution to the problem of rapid space travel exists. You might object, today, with artificial intelligence capable of generating realistic images, there are many fake videos. It's not all so straightforward. Here is just one fact to illustrate the level of discussion currently taking place in our human community on this matter.
Washington, July 26, 2023, 10 a.m. The first public hearings of witnesses in the UFO case began in the building of the House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress on Capitol Hill. The first to testify was Ryan Graves, a former F-18 pilot and the founder of Americans for Safe Aerospace, an organization that supports, researches, and educates crews who have encountered UFOs.
My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I'm a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve. I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me. Today, I would like to highlight 3 critical issues that demand our action. As we convene here, UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena. The stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security. It silences commercial pilots who fear professional repercussions, discourages witnesses, and is only compounded by recent government claims questioning the credibility of eyewitness testimony. Parts of our government are aware of more about UAP than they let on, but excessive classification practices keep crucial information hidden. Since 2021, all UAP videos are classified as secret or above. This level of secrecy not only impedes our understanding, but fuels speculation and mistrust. Recognizing the need for action and answers, I founded Americans for Safe Aerospace. The organization has since become a haven for UAP witnesses who were previously unspoken due to the absence of a safe intake process. More than 30 witnesses have come forward, and almost 5,000 Americans have joined us in the fight for transparency at safeaerospace.org. The majority of witnesses are commercial pilots at major airlines. Often, they are veterans with decades of flying experience. Pilots are reporting UAP at altitudes that appear above them at 40,000 feet, potentially in low Earth orbit or in the gray zone below the Kármán line, making inexplainable maneuvers like right-hand turns and retrograde orbits or J-hooks. Sometimes these reports are reoccurring, with numerous recent sightings north of Hawaii and in the North Atlantic. Other veterans are also coming forward to us regarding UAP encounters in our airspace and oceans.
520. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow. Roger, shooting. Look at this thing. It's rotating.
I have one particular case, and that was during the gimbal incident. The recording on the AT FLIR system shows a single object that rotates. You hear the pilots refer to a fleet of objects that is not visible on the FLIR system. And that was something that I witnessed during the debrief as part of the radar data on the situational awareness page. I would like to add, however, Congressman, there's a small bit of anger, I would say, I would feel that those pilots are still facing that difficulty in reporting this topic, and they don't have the tools to be able to mitigate this issue. It just goes to show how serious this is and why this is such an important issue for our pilots and for our nation. I believe these accounts are only scratching the surface, and more will share their experiences once it is safe to do so. In closing, I recognize the skepticism surrounding this topic. If everyone could see the sensor and video data I witnessed, our national conversation would change. I urge us to put aside stigma and address the security and safety issue this topic represents. If UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science. In either case, unidentified objects are concerned for flight safety. The American people deserve to know what is happening in our skies. It is long overdue. Thank you.
Pilot Ryan Graves described the situation overall. Indeed, governments do classify data. Nevertheless, despite the secrecy surrounding this issue, we could point to many videos in the public domain whose authenticity is beyond a doubt, although perhaps many of you still remain skeptical about this issue. Indeed, how is it possible to travel at least a few light years, especially given no one has ever seen these ships flying in open space towards Earth? Based on the modern technical capabilities of our civilization, spacecraft flights would likely appear as follows. The ship uses enormous fuel tanks, and considering its speed, travels not just thousands, but potentially hundreds of thousands or even millions of years to its destination, crossing vast clusters of space. Many telescopes in different spectral ranges have been scanning the night sky for decades. Objects like these would surely have been detected long before approaching Earth. Yet, no one has ever seen them flying towards us. So maybe they don't really fly. Perhaps this is the key to unraveling the inconspicuous appearance of UFOs on Earth. Maybe they instantly appear in their desired coordinates in Earth's or Moon's orbit. There are many such videos available online now. Every skeptic armed with a small telescope can witness similar phenomena. The audience is gathering. The closer we get to the point of climatic non-return, the more extraterrestrial observers will appear on Earth's orbit. For many, it's simply a global spectacle unfolding on a planetary scale. Advanced civilizations that have long passed this stage arrive to observe our choice, how our society will go through the cycle of cataclysms. They have no right to intervene. They simply observe. It's interesting. So the audience will continue to grow as we approach the peak of the cataclysms. But how is it possible to leap through space tens, hundreds, or even millions of light years? Of course, it would be interesting to directly ask extraterrestrials to answer the two main questions about teleportation. Where do they get such a huge amount of energy for the jump? And how do they determine the exact coordinates of the point they intend to jump to? The laws of the universe are such that no one has the right to interfere in people's choices. Not only advanced civilizations, but even God himself. Therefore, before attempting to interrogate extraterrestrials to uncover the secrets of teleportation, let's look closer under our feet. Perhaps those who know the secret of space travel are much closer than flying saucers.
The books of Ivan Terence Sanderson, a British-American naturalist and cryptozoologist, can often be found in online libraries under the science fiction section. One of his first books is a collection of essays titled Things. The original book was published in 1967 by Pyramid Books under the original title Things. Paradoxically, despite all efforts, we have not found a single electronic copy of the original English version of this book online. It was translated into Russian in 1991. One of the essays in this book is dedicated to Otta ants. Otta queens are giant females. To protect the queen, worker ants construct a strong concrete chamber that can only be destroyed with a crowbar. The chamber completely encloses the queen, with only a series of small holes at the very bottom of the worker ants to enter and exit. The entrances and exits for the worker ants are much smaller than the queen. When researchers reach this chamber, they carefully cut off its side and mark the back of the ant queen with paint. The queen occupies the entire space of the chamber. She cannot escape it on her own. After that, the chamber was closed for a few minutes, and when it was reopened, the queen was gone. Instead, she appeared in an identical chamber several dozen meters away from the first. This experiment was repeated multiple times. They marked the queen's back with paint through tiny holes. Then, they broke the sturdy cocoon, and each time, the the Queen was not there. She teleported to an alternative cocoon. This was repeated until they broke open the last cocoon in the ant colony. In the discovered cocoon, the Queen was in perfect health, and it was indeed her, as evidenced by the marked back. She behaved as if nothing had happened, eating and laying eggs. It is impossible to imagine that Atta ants managed to dig a tunnel several dozen meters long, build a new concrete chamber, and drag the Queen there in less than an hour or even a few hours. According to Sanderson, the results of these experiments indicate that the Atta ants have developed a teleportation system for the most important members of their society, which activates in emergencies. Many of you might think this could be a poorly conducted experiment because its results do not fit our understanding. This is entirely possible, especially since we have not found confirmation of this phenomenon from other entomologists. We should not forget that according to modern scientific understanding, a bumblebee should not be able to fly, but it does not know this and continues to fly.
In the modern world, humanity became acquainted with the concept of teleportation almost a century ago, specifically in 1931, thanks to the American writer Charles Fort, who was fond of studying paranormal phenomena. By analogy with the word television, which is derived from the Greek tele, far away, and the Latin video, to see, in his book, The Book of the Damned, Charles Fort introduced a term to describe unexplained movements of objects in space. The Latin word portare means to carry. Today, teleportation has moved from the pages of science fiction novels to the pages of scientific laboratory reports. As it happens in any consumer society, the issue of teleportation has been taken by specialists in the military-industrial complex. Of course, not much can be learned from open sources, but something from these works still pops up. This gives us an opportunity to assess trends and directions of development. Before we delve into the essence of teleportation and its principles, we need to survey the clearing where modern science stands.
According to Einstein's theory of relativity, nothing in space can move faster than light. But at the same time, the speed of motion of the space-time continuum itself is not limited in any way. This loophole allowed Mexican physicist Miguel Alcubierre to formulate the concept of the Alcubierre warp bubble and subsequently model an analog of a warp drive, which became known as the Alcubierre drive. In 1994, the prestigious scientific journal General Relativity and Quantum Cosmology, Miguel Alcubierre published an article titled "The Warp Drive: Hyper-Fast Travel Within General Relativity." In this article, Alcubierre proposed the concept of moving through space at faster than light speeds within the framework of general relativity. Alcubierre formulated the essence of his ideas as follows. Within the framework of general relativity and without the introduction of wormholes, it is possible to modify a space-time in a way that allows a spaceship to travel with an arbitrarily large speed. By a purely local expansion of space-time behind the spaceship and an opposite contraction in front of it, motion faster than the speed of light as seen by observers outside the disturbed region is possible. The idea of this engine is based on the hypothesis of space-time deformation at a speed much greater than the speed of light, which supposedly occurred in the early moments after the birth of our universe. The Alcubierre warp drive affects not only the spacecraft itself, but the space surrounding it. Space contracts in front of the spacecraft and expands behind it. This creates an energy potential, thanks to which the expanded space behind the ship will strive forwards the contracted space in front of the ship. As a result, a local gravitational wave is formed, which travels together with the spacecraft. The ship itself during the movement is at rest, and time on its board flows in the usual way, without experiencing relativistic changes. This method is named the Alcubierre warp drive. Within its framework, Einstein's relativistic physics operates, and the speed of light is never locally exceeded. There is one but in this design. The Alcubierre drive requires exotic matter with negative mass or negative energy to generate the space-time expansion effect. But even all the matter in the universe would not be enough to create a bubble of the necessary density to accommodate a 100-meter-long ship. Despite the fundamental problem, this work initiated theoretical research into warp drive, transforming it from pure science fiction into a potentially theoretical technology. NASA approached the theoretical elaboration and experimental verification of the principles outlined by Alcubierre with all seriousness. In 2011, at a conference in Orlando, a report was presented on the shape of the spacetime arising from the movement of the Alcubierre bubble. This report presents the modern understanding of the operation sequence of the Alcubierre drive, and it goes as follows. First stage. The spacecraft departs from Earth on traditional jet propulsion and covers some distance, after which it stops relative to Earth. Second stage. The Alcubierre field is activated, and the spacecraft embarks on an interstellar journey, covering the distance to its destination in an arbitrarily short period of time. Third stage. The field is deactivated at a certain distance from the destination, and the spacecraft completes the journey using conventional means. This method will allow reaching the Alpha Centauri system in a few weeks or months, and not in decades or centuries, both according to the clock of an observer on Earth and according to the clock installed on the spacecraft itself. Theoretically, using this scheme, a spacecraft with a Warp 5 modified drive will reach Pluto in 9 seconds, and Proxima Centauri in 18 hours. In conclusion, the NASA report noted, while it would appear that the model has nearly all the desirable mathematical characteristics of a true interstellar space drive, the metric has one less appealing characteristic: the need for negative energy density. The salient question is, can the idea be engineered to a point that it proves useful for exploration? Subsequent work on the Alcubierre warp bubble concept has reduced the amount of energy required for faster-than-light travel to the equivalent of Jupiter's mass. This is, of course, less than the mass of the entire universe, but still an unattainable amount for the energy for current humanity.
The required amount of energy is equivalent to the mass of Jupiter. For now, this sounds like a sentence, but it's better than nothing. At least we have another hypothetical method of teleportation in addition to the already existing hypothetical ant-based one that is already in our collection. It should be noted that traveling using such an engine is not teleportation in the literal sense. Why? True teleportation occurs without the expenditure of time, whereas here we have, albeit very fast, travel through time and space. What else does modern physics offer us? It turns out that we are not the only ones asking this question. In 2004, a review of teleportation methods was prepared by the US Air Force Research Laboratory under the direction of Dr. Eric Davis. The report is called Teleportation Physics Study and is publicly available.
The aim of the research was to collect information on the teleportation of material objects, Eric Davis compiled everything that was known from open sources at the time into 5 main directions. Moreover, the author of the report considers the science fiction direction as one of the main areas of research. The second significant direction he identifies is extrasensory teleportation or psychokinesis, the natural human ability to teleport objects and oneself. Among the technical methods of teleportation, Davis distinguishes 3 groups. The first group is teleportation by means of a wormhole, or stargates. The hypothesis that there might be tunnels in the structure of space-time allowing for instantaneous travel over vast distances, time travel, or travel between parallel universes was proposed in 1935 by Albert Einstein and Nathan Rosen. They drew attention to the solution of the simplest equations of general relativity describing isolated sources of gravitational field. The scientists suggested that this spatial structure resembles a bridge, connecting 2 different points in space-time known as stargates. Many well-known theoretical physicists, including Morris, Thorne, Utsever, and Riemann, showed interest in this topic. These authors developed and studied a class of objects called traversable wormholes. Davis refers to a variation of wormholes as space-time vacuum engineering. The modern concept of vacuum engineering was first introduced to the physics community in 1988 by researcher Song-Dao Lee. Lee stated, "The experimental method to alter properties of the vacuum may be called vacuum engineering. If indeed we are able to alter the vacuum, then we may encounter some new phenomenon, totally unexpected." This new concept is based on the fact, recognized today, that the vacuum is characterized by physical parameters and a structure that represents an energetic medium permeating the entire space of the universe. Implementing wormhole methods involves placing living or non-living objects into a sealed device. Once the teleporter is activated, the device almost instantly disappears and then reappears at a remote location, as if it had traveled through a portal or stargate for a short time. Davis notes that this type of teleportation is a theoretical concept and has not been implemented in practice. The second group of teleportation methods is based on quantum entanglement. The principle of this group involves transferring a system's quantum state and its correlations through space to another system. In this method, the system refers to any single or collective particles of matter or energy. Quantum entanglement-based teleportation should be performed as follows. Animate or inanimate objects placed in the teleporter are scanned using a computer-generated and controlled beam. The scanning beam encodes all the quantum information contained in the object into ordered bits of information, thereby creating a digital copy of the object. Next, the scanning beam dematerializes the transmitted object and stores its patterns in a buffer. All atomic components of the dematerialized object are converted into a stream of matter or pure energy. The teleporter then transmits this stream of quantum information signal to the destination in a circular compression beam. In the receiving teleporter, the energy stream is directed into the template buffer, where it undergoes recombination with the quantum information, restoring the object to its original form. Davis notes that in quantum teleportation, it is the quantum states of objects that are destroyed and recreated, not the object themselves. The third group of teleportation methods described by Davis in the report is whole teleportation. Whole teleportation implies moving people or inanimate objects by entering other spatial dimensions or parallel universes. This unusual concept of teleportation was proposed by Konstantin Lishan in 1999. Lishan describes the teleportation of objects across our universe using the geometric properties of space-time. According to this concept, it is assumed that a null space exists beyond our universe. The characteristic feature of this null space is that it has a point-like form. In other words, in the space of this point, the distance between any 2 points is always 0. LeSean refers to such a space as a hole. The teleportation mechanism in this model works as follows. An object is moved beyond the universe by creating a closed surface around it, a whole sphere consisting of vacuum holes. Inside such a whole sphere, the object ceases to exist, because objects cannot exist beyond the universe. However, simultaneously, the object now exists everywhere in the universe. If the object exists everywhere, therefore, it can be assembled at any other point in the universe. LeSean notes that a teleportation device must warp space-time so that the starting and ending points in the universe coincide, while the geometry of the warp must momentarily resemble the geometry of a black hole in order to form a channel between the 2 points. There is no space for movement, so there is no passage of time during teleportation. The only energy expenditure in this teleportation scheme is the energy required to warp space-time. Davis's report notes that this theoretical concept has not yet reached a level of technical maturity where the feasibility of this type of teleportation can be established.
As you can see, modern science does have a certain methodological basis. However, there are nearly insurmountable obstacles on the path of developing these methods. In addition to natural methods of teleportation, which might be used by ants and humans, we have 2 groups of technical methods. Those based on altering the properties of space to move the object entirely, and methods based on extracting information about all the particles of an object and transmitting not the object itself, but the information about its structure. To solve the problem using the first group of methods, by changing the properties of space, we need knowledge about the structure of emptiness. Today, science cunningly calls emptiness the physical vacuum, circumventing in this way the prohibition on mentioning the word ether. This prohibition was established 100 years ago and remains in place to this day. Therefore, science is compelled to speak in allegorical terms and introduce the same ether under new names. On this path, we face human stupidity as an insurmountable obstacle. The Holy Inquisition did not end in the 18th century. It resurfaced under new names like organization akin to the Commissions on Pseudoscience. Now heretics of science are not burned at the stake. Now heretics do everything themselves. They get into car accidents, fall out of windows, suddenly end their lives by suicide, and commit other acts fatal for them. We talked about this in detail in the film Stopped Progress, so we will not delve deeper into this dramatic issue, but we'll move on. Moving on to the second group of methods, we also encounter an insurmountable obstacle. For teleporting a person, it would be necessary to extract information from all atoms of their body, transmit this information through space, and then record it onto other atoms at the receiving end. Thus, the person would be reconstructed by transferring information from atoms at the transmission point to atoms at the reception point. The process of transmitting information about each particle of the body seems incredibly complex. In a human weighing about 70 kilograms, the number of atoms composing the body is so vast that the time required to transmit this data exceeds the age of the universe by 2,400 times. In addition to transmitting this incredibly large amount of information, other problems arise. We have learned to entangle free photons, But how do we unify macro objects like DNA molecules, moving blood, body cells, and the entire body itself? After all, we essentially need to obtain an exact copy of the original body. How then to revive cells that we have transferred to a new location? How to transmit vital energy to them? After all, the most important thing for any living being is life. What will actually happen to a person during the act of quantum teleportation? Essentially, the original is destroyed during teleportation, meaning the person undergoing teleportation dies. What's the point of teleporting the body to another planet if the person dies in the scanner? Perhaps after teleportation, a copy of the person's body, their corpse, appears on the other planet. But where does the person themselves end up after that? The problems do not end there. Another fundamental question arises. How do we reach the point where the information will be received if no receiving device is set up on the other side? How to send the information receiver to a neighboring galaxy? Perhaps for the first time in modern history, Nikola Tesla faced these questions when exploring teleportation. We studied his diaries prepared by Serbian journalist Stevan Jovanovic. According to Stevan, he gained access to Tesla's original manuscripts in 2011 with the assistance of President Richard Nixon's daughter. In preparing the diaries for publication, he discovered that they were far from complete. Some materials has disappeared. However, even what was preserved holds a significant interest in unraveling the secret of teleportation.
July 1884. On a ship traveling from Europe to America, there is a young man unknown to anyone. This is Nikola Tesla. At that time, he was 28 years old. Experiencing the hardships of the sea voyage across the Atlantic, Tesla recorded his first thoughts on the problem of teleportation in his diary. How foolish it is to waste so much time traveling from Europe to America and endure so much suffering. Sailing on ships, even modern ones, is very tormenting. Even the sailors themselves, those accustomed to the sea and considering the ship their home, are as happy to arrive at the port as children are to receive gifts. On the 9th day of the voyage, I had another insight. I realized that a three-dimensional space under the influence of pronounced electromagnetic forces, by pronounced, I mean gigantic forces, can be rolled into a tube. It is difficult for me to explain the essence of this process in simple terms so that people who do not know mathematics and physics can understand it. Rolling into a tube seems to me the most suitable explanation. Take a sheet of paper, roll it into a tube, pierce it through with a needle, and then unroll it. You will see how far apart the punctures are. But while the sheet was rolled up, they were close to each other, very near. If space can be folded using very powerful electromagnetic waves, continents can be brought closer together, and anything can be transported anywhere in fractions of a second. This incredible insight stunned me so much that I almost fell overboard. I promised myself that at the first opportunity, I would start developing this idea. Years will pass before Tesla can begin implementing his idea of teleportation. He writes about it as follows. Different researches have different costs. This project is very expensive because it requires the construction of at least 4 extremely powerful electromagnets and several other expenses. When I brought up the new project, people openly laughed at me. For some reason, people perceive what goes beyond their understanding as impossible. I tried to explain that electric motors also once seemed like a fairy tale, but I couldn't convince anyone. Although no one shared Tesla's ideas of the possibility of teleportation, he remained true to his dream. I look forward to the day, he wrote, when I will be able to send a gift to my sister Marika. I can imagine her surprise when a box of sweets suddenly appears on the table in front of her. with a note on top from me. To my dear sister, from your loving brother. Boyishness, pure boyishness. But I will not deny myself this pleasure. There are so few pleasures left in my life that I cannot neglect any of them. I hope to live to see the day when a container with cargo will travel from New York to Paris or London in less than a second. In 1936, Tesla finally found support for his endeavors in the U.S. Defense Department. He became the head of the Rainbow Project, which aimed to solve the problem of safe transportation of people and objects over long distances using electromagnetic fields. The project was based on my own developments. The overall project management was overseen by my longtime acquaintance Vaughn. We achieved great successes, the details of which I won't delve into as I am not allowed to do so. But I can say what I have said before. The problem was solved in general terms. We achieved the desired result, being able to transport objects of different sizes. You can say that the movement of any object, regardless of size, is possible. From the very beginning, I warned Vaughn that I would only proceed to experiments involving people when I was completely sure of their safety. I was pressured. They either offered to use volunteers from among the military or criminals sentenced to death. But I remained adamant. My moral principles are unwavering. Dangerous experiments I can conduct only on myself. Suddenly, I learned that one of the groups, under the scientific leadership of Vaughn himself, had secretly begun experiments involving people without informing me. 4 out of 7 people involved in the experiments died. 3 others suffered from these mental disorders, and one of these 3 began experiencing frequent epileptic seizures. What did these experiments give you? I asked. 4 corpses and 3 invalids? What have you achieved? So far nothing, Vaughn replied, but we will achieve. In other words, he made it clear that he had no intention of giving up on experiments involving humans. I resigned my position, handed over all my project-related records to Vaughn, and told him I did not want to see him anymore.
What we've just seen looks like a horror movie. Without understanding what they are doing, these so-called scientists endangered the lives and health of many people. Such science and such methods of research are impossible in a human-oriented society. In the civilization of the future, human life is the highest value, so everything done by science will benefit everyone on Earth. Nevertheless, the very fact that with the help of magnetic and electric fields, it was possible to transmit a biological object over a distance to a pre-planned point in space and restore it almost to its original state indicates that the problem is not as daunting as transmitting information over a time exceeding the lifespan of the universe and does not require energy comparable to the mass of Jupiter. Of course, many questions arises. But since the most valuable information is hidden from the public in the consumerist format, we will start to untangle this nest of snakes on our own. Let's start with the main question. What exactly are we going to transmit?
Everything known to people today, from subatomic particles to atoms, from dust on our shoes to clusters of galaxies in distant space, all exist thanks to organized information. It is precisely organized information that creates matter, determines its properties, volume, shape, mass, and other characteristics. In other words, we are talking about information as a force that organizes the material world. Dawson Church, a philosopher, writer, and healthcare researcher, wrote in his book, Mind to Matter. Energy is not an epiphenomenon of matter. Energy is organizing matter. Every object has its own energy field. It has specific shape and characteristics determined by information. Harold Burr, a scientist from Yale University in the USA, studied these types of fields. Burr concluded that these fields are not generated by living organisms, but rather create matter, forming force lines around which atoms, molecules, and cells assemble. In his book, Blueprint for Immortality, The Electric Patterns of Life, he wrote, "In building living forms, the fields of life override the normal laws of chemistry and physics. They compel atoms and molecules to assume and to retain through constant changes of material stable arrangements, which break down to simpler compounds after the death of the form. If it were not for this overriding authority of the L fields, you and I could not exist in our present form because the complex molecules of which we are composed could not build themselves on their own or by chance and could not retain their composition." Studying the shape of electrostatic fields in salamanders, Burr discovered that the offspring possess energy fields approximately replicating the form of the adult salamander. The vector of intensity of these fields passes through the head and spinal cord, forming a kind of axis along the nervous system. Burr wanted to determine at which stage of the animal's development this axis first appears, and found that it already exists in maternal egg cells. He observed a similar effect in plants. Even by the field of a seed, one can determine the genetic indicators, as well as determine whether the plant will be strong or weak. Once, the scientists photographed a plant seed and discovered on the photographic plate an exact image growing in the form of the adult plant. After this seed germinates, the young organism begins to develop inside the energy field, and in the process of growth simply fills the energy form. Fractality also characterizes the entire universe. According to the Soviet aircraft designer and theoretical physicist Robert Oros di Bartini, the universe is a single entity that exists everywhere at all times. Being simultaneously in different places and at different times, it is finite and infinite, like a snake biting its own tail. One can imagine it as a looped thread passing through everything that exists. It can be visualized as a mirrored sphere containing another sphere within it, and so on. But the smallest matryoshka of all is the one that encompasses the rest. Thus, the universe is absolutely identical to its smallest element, because that smallest element is the universe itself. There is nothing in the world except this incomprehensible particle. The rest are merely images, a grand six-dimensional hologram, if you will, an endless dream.
Robert Oros di Bartini, a brilliant Soviet aircraft designer, author of more than 60 completed aircraft projects. He didn't just design airplanes. All his projects were far ahead of their time. They were so advanced that they often seemed like science fiction to the aviation industry leadership and therefore didn't receive the necessary support. But Bartini not only created unconventional airplanes, the theory of the six-dimensional universe came out of his pen. He indeed was a man of the future. Listen to his remarkable words once again. Existing simultaneously in different places and different times, the universe is both finite and infinite, like a serpent biting its own tail. Perhaps right here lies the key to teleportation. Without the need to transmit volumes and information over a time longer than the lifespan of a universe. Or how about this phrase of his? It is self-similar. At the foundation of the universe lies a single particle. Everything else is simply a grand six-dimensional hologram. Why does Bartini call the universe a dream? And what is a hologram? Perhaps in these words, there is another clue to answering the question about the coordinates of the teleportation point. Let's start with the hologram.
To obtain a hologram of an object, a laser beam is passed through a beam splitter. As a result, two beams are formed. The first beam is directed by a mirror onto a photographic film. The second one illuminates the object and, upon reflection, also reaches the same film. On the film, both beams interfere to create an interference pattern. This is how a holographic recording is produced. To get a three-dimensional image of an object, it is enough to illuminate the film with the same laser beam. A unique property of a hologram is its self-similarity. If we divide the image in half, each image will contain the image of the entire object. If we divide the half image again and illuminate it with the laser beam, we will once again obtain two identical images of the original object. This process can be continued further, and each part will still contain the image of the whole object. University of London physicist David Bohm believes that objective reality does not exist. That despite its apparent solidity, the universe is at heart a phantasm, a gigantic and splendidly detailed hologram.
A hologram has an unusual property. If you take a piece of photographic film that has a holographic image encoded in it, that means that you cannot see the image with your naked eye. You have to reconstruct the image, you have to shine a laser through it. So if you have an image of a rose in the film, shine a laser through the rose, you'll get a three-dimensional image of the rose on the other side. You cut that film in half, shine a laser through each piece, you'll get a whole rose out of each piece, which is a very unusual property and sort of boggles the imagination at first. Cut it in four, you get four roses. Cut it in eight, you get eight roses. So the universe is a hologram. It means, as William Blake said, that quite literally you can find the universe in a grain of sand, that every portion of the universe contains some semblance of the whole universe. That reality in a hologram can manifest in two ways, as a concrete image or as this sort of indecipherable blur of energy. And an analogy to this is kind of when you're watching Johnny Carson on your television set, that's really, his image is encoded in two ways. One is as the concrete image on the TV set, one is as the blur of radio waves permeating the living room. And if the universe is a hologram of some sense, in some way, it suggests that there may be two very drastically different levels to reality, that the concrete reality we see, you know, when we look at these chairs and at the trees and the clouds and everything like that.
Our bodies.
Are just one way that reality manifests, and that at some deep level, there's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy that is holographically interconnected, where every portion of the universe is contained in every tiny area of the universe.
Imagine that everything you see, feel and hear in 3 dimensions, and your perception of time, in fact emanates from a flat, 2-dimensional field. The idea is similar to that of ordinary holograms, where a 3-dimensional image is encoded in a 2-dimensional surface, such as in the hologram on a credit card. However, this time the entire universe is encoded. Castus Scanderus.
An international team of theoretical physicists and astrophysicists studying the inhomogeneities of the cosmic microwave background, or the afterglow of the Big Bang, have found compelling evidence supporting the holographic nature of the universe. If the universe is indeed holographic, it would resolve the issue of determining precise coordinates of the leap for teleportation. After all, one property of a hologram is that each part contains information about the entire hologram. Consequently, it will not be difficult for the science of the future to determine where everything is located within the hologram. This means that at the starting point of the leap, we will know exactly which part of the hologram we will end up in.
Using the principle of the holographic nature of the universe, it can be argued that information about any object exists at every point in space. This information is strictly ordered. Let's hypothetically call this ordered information bricks. This is a crucial point for teleportation. It suggests that there is no need to physically move the body or its constituent particles. You only need to activate the necessary information at the destination point. This information is present everywhere.
Suppose that several fundamental information building blocks form a structure that represents a local point, some object. We put it in the middle of a room, in which a multitude of mirrors is placed at a certain angle, in such a way that it is reflected in each of them. So, the object is in the middle of the room, and it is reflected in every mirror. Also, we see it, and therefore, information about it exists in our minds. In short, the information about the object exists simultaneously in several places. If we remove one of the mirrors, we will not observe this object in that place. But when we return the mirror, it will reappear. So, in fact, information about it has not disappeared. It is just that we see the object under certain conditions of manifestation of information, and once conditions have changed, we no longer see it. Objectively, however, this object continues to exist in that place in terms of information. The reflection may have a continuous flow. So it means that this object exists in each point of the room, and incidentally, not only of the room, but also of the space outside of the limits of the room, regardless of whether we see it or not.
So, what have we come to in our research? We have come to the understanding that information about everything exists everywhere. This means that if a change occurs in one place, information about this change instantaneously and without the expenditure of time is reflected in every point of the universe. The universe is holographic and self-similar. In other words, the smallest quantum of matter contains information about the entire universe. The map of the universe exists in each of its little bricks. If we could read this information, we would know exactly where to leap. The second important implication of holography is that absolute emptiness cannot exist. Even where, according to modern science, there is nothing, a structure of spatial framework must be preserved. If this were not the case, the principle of self-similarity would be violated. In these places, the universe would cease to be similar to itself. The question about the quantum of space, the smallest element of space in which the universe is reflected, remains open. When we understand how this brick is designed, we will understand how the entire universe is designed. Another important conclusion follows from the principle of self-similarity. Since the universe is stable, it means the elementary brick, which lies at the foundation of everything, is stable as well. If something happens to it, the entire universe will change because each such brick reflects and contains everything. A question may arise. If a fundamental stable element underlies everything, then due to what do we observe constant changes? Everything around us is in motion. Electrons around atoms, planets in their orbits, the solar system around the galaxy's center, and so on. Let us turn again to Bartini's reflections.
Before me, a clock pendulum is swinging. At its extreme positions, the pendulum stops. Between these positions, it is in motion. I film the oscillations of the pendulum with a movie camera. The successive positions of the pendulum are displayed side by side along the length of the film. All present here motionless to the same extent. But all the frames are slightly blurred. During exposure, the pendulum moved, and the center of the weight is depicted not as a point but as a dash. I increase the filming speed, the short exposure duration gets shorter and shorter, and the dash becomes shorter and shorter. What will happen in the limit? I will get a sequence of motionless discrete points, closely adjacent to each other. Here is the point. Then it immediately disappears and reappears there, nearby. Is it the same point? Or did one disappear and another appear? What is the nature of motion? Is it a sum of motionless positions or a sum of disappearances and reappearances? If it is a sum of positions entirely devoid of motion, then how does motion appear? If it is a disappearance and reappearance, then where does the point disappear and from where does it reappear? Does it emerge from nothing? Is it destroyed when it disappears? Or does it exist alternately in being and in otherness? What is otherness? And what is being? Such were Bartini's reflections. Indeed, when we reach the smallest moment where there are no changes, but there is an elementary static picture, the question arises, where does it come from? Following this, another question arises. How does the change occur? The next picture is already different from the previous one, and there are no intermediate states between them. So the question is, how and where did the change occur? Many centuries before Bartini, similar thoughts about elementary quanta of the existence were recorded in the Buddhist doctrine of momentariness of being, Sanikkhavada. According to Sanikkhavada, the highest reality consists of point-like moments called dharmas. Dharmas, derived from the Sanskrit root dar, meaning to hold, to support, are indivisible carriers of elements that fragment the stream of existence. Every moment, dharmas flare up and disappear, forming a new pattern. Dharmas are in constant motion in a flow of becoming and destruction. Each dharma exists only for a single moment in time. The material world is an unending stream of dharmas, which are inherently simple and indivisible. Furthermore, from the perspective of Sanikkhavada, matter does not exist at all. There is only a succession of dharmas. Perceiving the world by living beings is similar to the perceiving frames on a film strip. These frames move at such a high speed that the observer's eye cannot discern their separateness. Dharmas create for the observer a comprehensive illusion of a stable and constant reality.
If I continue to increase the speed of the metronome oscillation, at some point I will no longer be able to see its separate positions in space. Our eyes are designed in such a way that it perceives discrete images as continuous if their frequency exceeds 16 frames per second. For this reason, we do not notice the discreteness of this world. The frequency of changing states of our world far exceeds the frame rate of a film camera. And here we come to the most important part of our story. If we manage to slip between the adjacent frames of reality, we will find ourselves nowhere in space and nowhere in time. Based on the principle of holography, we can exit this non-spatial state into any location in the universe. Obviously, such a journey will take no time at all. Let's take a closer look at this interframed interval. It's not an easy task to peer into the very foundation of creation. First, let's try to understand how quickly frames of reality alternate in the film strip of our world. But when attempting to measure the frame rate, we'll encounter an insurmountable obstacle. All our instruments are inside the world itself and obey its rules, while we need to measure the time between moments of non-existence. No, both clocks and metronomes are present in reality. These are not the tools we need. Let's start by at least acknowledging the discreteness of the universe. Discreteness. This word means divided and discontinuous. The modern science of discreteness grew from the works of the ancient Greek philosopher Democritus, who is considered the father of atomism. He had a hypothesis about the existence of the primary basis of the world, amers and atoms, the smallest point-like parts of space and the tiniest particles of matter. Over time, ancient knowledge was distorted and lost, and the Buddhist doctrine of Kshanikavada became known in the West much later. Humanity would have continued to live with these ideas if, at the beginning of the 20th century, phenomena had not been discovered that cannot be explained using Newton's mechanics and Maxwell's electrodynamics.
When science gained the ability to study individual elementary particles, the first thing it encountered in the micro world was the paradox of duality. It turned out that particles have a dual nature. For example, a photon can simultaneously be both a particle and a wave. When physics became accustomed to this reality, nature presented a new paradox. The emission spectra of various substances did not match the calculated ones. It was necessary to reconsider the very foundation of the just-born physics of elementary particles. This was a real catastrophe for science. The paradox was called the ultraviolet catastrophe. According to all calculations, the spectral density of the radiation of a black body should be proportional to its temperature and inversely proportional to the wavelength at which the measurement is carried out to the fourth power. However, experimental data suggested otherwise. In an attempt to resolve this problem, in 1900, the German physicist Max Planck proposed the idea that the emission and absorption of energy are discrete in nature. Considering the process of energy exchange between a glowing body and the surrounding space, Planck assumed that the exchange is carried out in the form of small portions of energy. He described this process mathematically and arrived at the formula that exactly matched the distribution of energy in the spectrum of the sun and other heated bodies. Thus, the concept of the smallest portion of energy, a quantum, entered modern science. The quantum of energy introduced in Max Planck's calculations appeared in the final formula as a quantum of action, a quantity that is the product of energy by time. This quantity was named after its discoverer, Planck's constant. The value of Planck's constant cannot be derived from other calculations. It is a fundamental physical constant whose value is determined by the nature of our universe. The discovery of this constant revolutionized the physics of that time. It provided the basis for the discreteness of the electromagnetic field and all elementary particles, and it was established that even light propagates in quanta. As a result of further research, it turned out that the atom is not at all similar to the planetary model proposed by Rutherford and Bohr. The electron does not orbit the nucleus like a planet around the sun, but rather has contours resembling a cloud or the blades of a spinning fan, managing to fill every part of its orbit simultaneously. In practice, this means that it is impossible to predict where the electron will be at any given moment. Physicists realized they had discovered a world where electrons can jump from one orbit to another without moving through the space in between. According to the hypothesis of Doctor of Philosophy Yuri Gennadievich Ivanov, such behavior of the electron can be explained by flickering, or, in other words, the discrete appearance and disappearance of electron vortices, with a precessional shift in the coordinates of their appearance in space and time. This essentially means the alternation of the appearance and disappearance of matter. In other words, matter is created by discrete vortical energy flows. Physicists call this quantum fluctuations. A quantum fluctuation is a state of the physical vacuum that is akin to boiling broth, in which virtual particles constantly appear and disappear. The practical observation of the reality of virtual particles' emergence is manifested, for example, in the Lamb shift.
As we can see, physical science understood the discreteness of energy more than 100 years ago. But the question remains, where is the electron while it is moving from one state to another? We could observe this if we could turn on a high-speed film camera and record the transition of the electron from one energy orbital to another. However, by analogy with Planck's fundamental quantum of energy, there might be a theoretical limit that will not allow us to discern individual frames of the electron's movement. Perhaps this discrete interval is the smallest possible time in the universe. What does science know today about this quantum of time?
In the material world, when we say that a body is moving, we mean that it changes position in space over a certain period of time. This is what common sense tells us. But what is time? This is one of the most difficult questions that can be asked in physics. We are good at measuring time, but we still have a rather poor understanding of what exactly we are measuring. In the International System of Units, SI, the values of all standard units are determined precisely and do not require experimentation, and only the unit of time measurement, the second, is still determined from experience. Today, a second is the time equivalent to 9,192,631,770 periods of radiation corresponding to the transition between two hyperfine levels of the ground state of cesium-133 atom. Everyone can notice that subjective time is heterogeneous and can go faster or slower. An hour spent in pleasant company seems shorter than 5 minutes spent in a crowded bus. This subjective time cannot be measured. Therefore, people quickly learn to measure time by aligning it with astronomical cycles. Reoccurring, periodic natural phenomenon can be measured and compared with one's own sensations. Let's call the counting of these cycles objective time. Newton defined time as a certain quantity that can be determined throughout the entire universe at once. This is global, absolute time, because it is entirely objective and does not depend on human perceptions, a kind of ideal time. We cannot measure it, since our clocks are in a system of reference of locally objective time. Let's take a matchstick. Imagine that the fire of this match from the moment of its appearance until the end of the burning of the stick is process of the emergence and destruction of all matter. The moment of motion when I take this matchstick, bring it to the box, apply force to strike a spark, the moment of ignition, and until it completely burns. All of this, figuratively speaking, on a global scale, is the flow of true time. That is, the moment of the emergence, action, and disappearance of the force of creation in the process of creating and destroying matter. For our human perception, in this time, there is no present, only the past and the future. Global time is the moment of the flow of time from the beginning of the first spark to the end of the complete burning of the matchstick. Moreover, it is more accurate to characterize this entire process not by the burning of the matchstick with the sulfur head upwards in a vertical position, but by the burning of the matchstick with the sulfur head downwards. Notice the difference in the speed of the flame. The same process, roughly speaking, occurs on a global scale. The expanding universe with increasing speed inevitably accelerates global time, yet this does not affect true time in any way. Judgments about the flow of time depend on the point of reference from which the process is observed. For example, let's take an experimental matchstick of gigantic proportions, 1 kilometer in length, and you are an observer, that is, in our case, a point of the reference system who, for the study of this burning process, is placed on a lift, or, say, on a similar gigantic tower crane installed parallel to the match. Imagine that the burning process has begun, and the flame, in which our comparison represents the universe that has originated and started expanding, moves from bottom to top. If your speed of movement on the lift will be the same as the speed of the fire, then for your perception, time will be relatively motionless. If you move faster than the flame, you'll feel that the burning time slows down. And if you move slower than the flame, you will see that time has accelerated. Using the example of a match burning, objective time is indeed the moment of the physical and chemical processes occurring during combustion. Subjective time, on the other hand, is the individual perception of the passage of this process. However, since global time is constantly accelerating, objective time also accelerates accordingly. From the perspective of subjective perception, though, objective time does not change for individuals. For instance, a day still consists of 24 hours, as it always has.
The existence of the arrow of time means that every moment is unique. As we have discovered, this is a sequence of instantaneous static states, dharmas, that differ from one another. The differences between adjacent states are determined by information processes. But how, then, is it possible to move without losing time? Or can the universe contain two identical moments in time?
Nikolai Kozyrev was one of the first to draw attention to the fact that, in real life, the equality of interacting bodies and the reversibility of occurring processes, as a rule, do not take place. In reality, processes are almost always irreversible, and interacting bodies can objectively be classified as either cause or effect. Moreover, the effect always occurs later than the cause. In this regard, time is fundamentally different from space. But can cause and effect switch places? It turns out they can. In cases where the postulate that the speed of light is the maximum possible speed is violated. Paradoxically, it turned out that such speed exists. In autumn 1977, a group of scientists led by Nikolai Kozyrev conducted observations of the galaxy M31 in the Andromeda Nebula and the globular clusters M2 and M13 using a 50 decimeter reflector at the Crimean Astrophysical Observatory. The observations involved measuring the positions of areas in the sky with a micrometer guide, which caused changes in the electrical conductivity of a resistor in the vicinity of these objects. It turned out that these changes originated from 3 points in the sky. 1. The current position of the object. 2. The position in the past, accurate to refraction, coinciding with its visible image. And 3. The position in the future, which the object will occupy when a signal from Earth traveling at the speed of light would reach it. Observations showed that the galvanometer readings indeed recorded all 3 points. And this means that instant information transfer is carried out through the physical properties of time. Time does not spread throughout the universe, but appears everywhere at once. The entire universe is projected onto the time axis as a single point. Therefore, changes in the properties of a particular second appear everywhere at once, decreasing according to the law of inverse proportionality of the first degree of distance. So, the effect of time appears not only instantaneously, but also along the trajectory of the four-dimensional Minkowski world, the length of which is 0. Along this entire trajectory, proper time is the same, and therefore, the moment appears on it immediately. For an observer, however, it will propagate at the speed of light. As a result of his research, Kozyrev formulated a postulate about the geometric characteristics of an elementary cause and effect link. In an elementary cause and effect link, the cause and effect are always separated by spatial and temporal distances that are arbitrarily small but not equal to 0. The ratio of these distances is the same for all cause and effect interactions, meaning it is a fundamental universal constant. Essentially, Kozyrev postulates the existence of a quantum of space-time, or, in the language of our film, that the distance in time between neighboring dharmas is constant. It turns out that the universe has a built-in clock generator that forms a synchronizing pulse, according to which one cycle of elementary change occurs. In his work, A New Look at Theoretical and Applied Aspects of Quantum Physics, Vladimir Fedorov also discusses the existence of a quantum of time. He defines it as a time interval that cannot be fundamentally reduced. The fundamental idea of the hypothesis is that the frequency of energy radiation has a limiting value for the entire universe, and this value will never be exceeded. Based on the ratios of the maximum possible frequency and the maximum possible energy of quantum, he concludes to the minimal possible time interval, the time discrete. In physical space, there is a minimum length between the crests of two neighboring oscillations, which can be defined as the distance traveled in the minimum time at the maximum speed. So another researcher concludes that the world appears as a series of discrete moments.
We have concluded that not only space, but also time in the universe is discrete. Time has a minimum unit that separates one static frame of existence from another. A logical question arises: what happens in the interval between frames of existence and between the discretes of space? Obviously, if such an interval of space exists, it cannot be material. Therefore, for a material observer, these discrete space units are fused into a single whole. After all, he looks from the material world, so the material interval between the discrete units is fundamentally unobservable for the material observer. Paradoxical. Modern physics, known the Greisen-Zetsepin-Kuzmin limit, which imposes a fundamental restriction on the energy of protons traveling from other galaxies through intergalactic space and reaching Earth observers. This limitation exists because particles from sources in other galaxies must lose all their energy on their way to us. Given that, they have to travel for millions and billions of years. Imagine, for example, a particle that has traveled from the galaxy GNZ11. GNZ11 is currently the farthest galaxy known to humanity. Its light took more than 13 billion years to reach Earth-based telescopes. Yes, 13 billion years. And during all this time, the particle just kept flying straight towards us without deviating until it finally reached the telescope. The paradox lies in the fact that in the observed cosmic rays, these are protons whose energy exceeds the Greisen-Zetsepin-Kuzmin limit. But this cannot be. After all, during all these billions of years that the particle flies to us from GNZ11, it constantly interacts with the cosmic microwave background radiation that was formed at the moment of the creation of the universe and which is constantly present at every point. It should lose its energy on interaction, but we observe them. How can this be? A hypothesis arises, appealing in its simplicity. Perhaps the particle doesn't fly towards us over billions of years, but appears in the right place exactly at the moment it begins to be observed. If this hypothesis is correct, then everything we see around us is, as they say nowadays, just a banal scam. As Papa Carlo explained to Buratino, the hearth is drawn on a piece of old canvas. When we begin to observe a distant star, it means that its light has already reached us in the form of photons. But how does a photon know when it's time for it to manifest? That's the question. The answer lies in the holographic nature of our universe.
Holograms display objects in three-dimensional space. Viewers do not need to use special glasses to see the object from above, below, or from all sides. This technology is used in various fields, such as presentations, museums, and advertising campaigns. A hologram is a three-dimensional record of light reflected from an object. It accurately reproduces the object's contours and shows it from different angles in continuous motion. A laser beam is used to create such an image. It is divided into two waves. The reference wave, it comes from the light source. The objective wave, it is reflected from the recording object. Surfaces have different reflective properties, so the intensity of the object wave changes based on where the laser beam hits. The reflected light of the object wave is recorded on a photographic plate, forming the hologram. So, if we apply the principle of holography to our world, it turns out that a certain substrate, framework, or matrix is needed for its formation. Our eyes can act as built-in sensors for perceiving this hologram, similar to virtual reality glasses. Modern physics has come close to the idea that all the space in our universe represents an ordered, high-density medium composed of stationary, very small particles. Knowledge about these particles is scattered in the myths and legends of many cultures around the world. These particles are called Po. The stationary Po particles form a static framework. Figuratively, this framework can be imagined as a flat crystalline lattice that fills the entire universe. This immaterial structure is the framework of the universal matrix. In our understanding, it would resemble an object somewhat like a brick. The height of the side face of this brick is 1/72 of the size of its base. An analogy can be drawn between the framework of the universal matrix and a display screen. Each cell of the lattice is like a pixel on the screen. On this universal screen, a volumetric image of our reality is formed in 6 dimensions. In other words, it is a 6-dimensional picture, unlike the one which we're now observing, the action of this film. We exist inside this display matrix. The expansion of the universe is limited by the size of the brick. A clear analogy here is that a multi-dimensional image cannot go beyond the screen's boundaries. Bartini came to this understanding and wrote about it in his work, Bartini's 6-dimensional space. How are its cells organized? The entire universal lattice consists of a fixed number of identical cells, which in 3-dimensional space take the form of cubes and are separated from neighboring cells by 6 walls. Matrix membranes. A matrix membrane is a unique immaterial structure characterized by the so-called paradox of dimensions. In the 3-dimensional realm, the matrix membrane practically has no thickness, yet it truly exists, and its inner space is boundless. The main action that gives life to the whole material system takes place through the matrix membrane, its center. The number of cells throughout the universe's life is constant. No events can change the size or mutual position of matrix cells. In the center of each matrix cell resides a stationary Po particle. The number of stationary Po particles, as well as the number of cells, is constant throughout the existence of the universe. Nothing can move a stationary Po beyond the boundaries of its matrix cell. The matrix cell is the elementary discrete unit of space, an element of self-similarity as described by Bartini. All visible or invisible matter consists of phantom Po particles. Unlike stationary Po particles, which always occupy the same position in the lattice, phantom Po particles never stop. They are in constant motion. Unlike the fixed number of stationary Po particles, their number constantly changes. The entire visible universe is formed precisely from these phantom Po particles. The phantom Po particle has an important property. It can penetrate the matrix membrane and participate in the process of energy and information exchange. Due to this property of phantom Po particles, all matter has a discrete character of its motion. In the matrix cell, a significant process of partial redistribution of energy and information takes place, as well as collisions of phantom Po particles, occurring under the influence of stationary Po particles. This process determines the further development, transformation, or destruction of matter formed by phantom Po particles. Any elementary particle consists of several phantom Po particles. The simplest particle is the photon, which is made up of only 3 phantom Poe particles. The flight time of a phantom Poe particle through a matrix cell is the minimum time of the material universe. Thus, a matrix cell represents the smallest discrete unit of space and time. Just as objects smaller than 1 pixel cannot be displayed on a display, so on the global screen of the matrix, there can be no spatial and temporal values smaller than the size of the matrix cell and the flight time of a phantom Poe particle through the cell. The elementary cycle of existence can be described as follows. 1. Emergence of phantom Poe particles from membranes. This is the beginning of the existence of one dharma, one cycle of material being. 2. Interaction of phantom Poe particles with stationary Poe particles. Exchange of energy and information. This represents the elementary time of the existence of matter, one moment of being. 3. Disappearance of phantom particles into matrix membranes. The universe returns to non-existence until the next cycle of existence. But this is not the lowest level of matter structuring. The Poe particles themselves, both phantom and stationary, consist of septons, even smaller objects. But that is another story.
As you understand, we have come very close to answering the main question of our film. Now you know that the matrix membrane is the key to the teleportation process. As elementary particles passing through the membrane disappear from the screen of the global matrix, macro objects composed of elementary particles also disappear into the matrix membrane every moment. The question of teleportation involves organizing information processes inside the matrix membrane in such a way that the teleported macro object can appear in another specified location in the universe. This is possible because any object is a hologram formed by phantom Poe during its manifestation in the current frame of existence. Inside the membrane, there is neither time nor space. Unfortunately, such effects as true teleportation are fundamentally impossible for modern physics. Currently, official science operates within the bounds of the reality formed by the global screen of the matrix grid. Understanding teleportation requires stepping beyond this screen. The knowledge of physics of the future provides fundamentally new insights into answering questions like what to fly, how far can we fly, under what conditions can we fly, and how do we create artificial gravity close to Earth conditions on board of spacecraft, how to live autonomously in space, and how to protect a spacecraft from cosmic radiation. They also reveal an understanding of the nature of the universe itself, which serves as a natural laboratory for elementary particles and conducts experiments under conditions that are impossible on Earth. Today, this knowledge is being actively explored by advanced scientists of our planet. Therefore, not only teleportation, but also time travel are no longer just theories. Those of you who have watched to this point are probably eagerly awaiting the disclosure of the main principle of teleportation. As you know now, all objects in our world, including us, constantly disappear and reappear. In other words, they teleport. In this world, everything constantly disappears in the matrix membrane and reappears on the screen of the global matrix. This natural teleportation is controlled by the energy and information of ongoing processes. The question is, how can we alter the natural course of this flickering and learn to control it? The clue is in this video.
In one cell, there is one stationary Poe particle. If 2 phantom Poe particles simultaneously enter the cell, the stationary PO can absorb energy and information from them. However, if more than 2 phantom PO particles enter the cell simultaneously, the stationary PO particle will absorb energy and information only from one of these 2 phantom PO particles. All the others will pass through without losing energy or information. This, in turn, leads to the malfunctioning of the matrix itself. This malfunction results from the excitation of the own field of the stationary PO particle. Rather than absorbing energy, they start to emit it, creating a dense field that leads to the local excitation and energy release. This principle is similar to the operation of FFGs, fuel-free generators. In FFGs, the excitation of the field of the stationary PO particles is achieved due to the rotation speed. In the case of the metals, this effect of energy release is achieved due to the density of their crystal lattice. So, let's draw a conclusion. All supernatural effects can be explained by physical laws that lie beyond the quantum limit. Humanity still needs to grasp this physics to ensure its survival, because controlling the smallest particle of the universe opens the way to controlling all matter, which means that it can help us reach a new level of development for our civilization.
Now that we have studied the theoretical foundations and know that movement requires energy and the coordinates of the destination point, let's see how other civilizations that have long ago solved this issue for themselves accomplish this.
Since the beginning of aviation, static electricity has been a major issue. Due to the friction with the aircraft during flights gains a charge from 200 to 300 microcoulombs, which means that its potential increases to 200 to 300 kilovolts. But instead of using this energy, today, it is neutralized by all available means. As early as 1927, Nikola Tesla proposed using static electricity for flight. In his article, The World System of Wireless Transmission of Energy, he writes, "One of the most important uses of wireless energy will be undoubtedly the propulsion of flying machines to which can be readily supplied without ground connection. For although the flow of the current is confined to the Earth, an electromagnetic field is created in the atmosphere surrounding it. If conductors or circuits accurately attuned and properly positioned are carried by the plane, energy is drawn into these circuits much the same as a fluid will pass through a hole created in the container. No fuel of any kind will be required, as the propulsion will be accomplished by light electric motors operated at great speed. This effect is based on the fact that at the height of 50 meters from the ground, there is a huge number of free charged particles in the air. When an airplane flies, it collects all these particles with its metal hull along the path of its movement. Modern composite multi-layer materials will allow transforming the outer shell of the aircraft or spacecraft, traversing high-speed streams of charged particles, into a stable, high-power energy source. This means fuel will only be required for initial acceleration. Further, the aircraft fuselage, serving as a static accumulator, will provide the required energy for electric motors. UFOs might operate on this principle, but instead of friction against the air and collecting static from the atmosphere, they employ more profound principles of friction against the matrix frame, forcing the matrix itself to operate differently, not to absorb energy, but on the contrary, to emit it. After accumulating enough energy for a leap, the ship enters the matrix membrane. From an external perspective, this appears as opening a portal for the ship to enter. Subsequently, another portal opens at the desired location in the universe for the ship to exit. Interestingly, the ship exits the portal at the same velocity at which it entered it. The teleportation mechanism may look like this: energizing the space around the ship during acceleration, accumulating particle energy, then opening a portal and leaping through the space to another star.
So, the universal principle of modern physics is to disrupt the equilibrium in a local area of the screen of the global matrix, which forms the so-called laws of physics or the objective reality that contemporary science studies. As the English say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Today, science is primarily funded by financial and industrial groups and through their lobbyists by government bodies. Naturally, under such circumstances, it is forced to serve the interests of those who finance it. The task of science of the new time is to make the matrix serve all of humanity, each and every one of us. Moreover, today, this is becoming vitally necessary. Without new physics, the human community will be destroyed by cyclical cataclysms that have already begun. But to make the system work for us, we must become a united people of the planet Earth. Only a united civilization, standing on the path of creative development, can gain access to this knowledge. The first result of appealing new physics will be climate control, which will allow us to survive the cataclysms. And beyond that, there will be no more boundaries. We will discuss this in the next films of the series Technologies of the Creative Society, about fuel-free energy, the multiple prolongation of life of each person beyond the species limit, matter replicators, and the planetary economic management system. Our film about the possibility of interstellar travel is coming to an end. In conclusion, it remains to be said that it's precisely interstellar flights that will make our civilization a full-fledged member of the great cosmic family of people who have chosen the path of creative development. This time is very near. A brave Chechen has already been born who will become the commander of the first interstellar ship of Earthlings. This flight will be assigned to the entire universe. Another civilization has freed itself from the shackles of the consumerist format and embarked on the path of love, peace, and creation.